care homes and centers. And we'll turn it over to community.
My name is Amy, and I work for the Community Development Department as the Planning and Zoning Administrator. We have a property owner in R1 who wants to up their current child care from 10 to 15, but the ordinance prohibits that. So I put together a little slide with just some facts. So currently, the definitions for the family child care home, which is what she currently has, it matches what the state has, and it says that the state licensed child care facility is in which care is provided for 3 to 10 unrelated children from more than one immediate family for part of the day in the home of the provider. What they're looking for is for the FCCC, which is the Family Child Care Center, a state licensed child care facility in which care is provided for 11 to 15 unrelated children from more than one immediate family for part of the day in which may be a commercial type structure, so it can be in a home or in the residential structure or in a commercial structure. We're not really looking at the CCCs, that's for 16 or more, and those are mostly in business areas. This next map just shows we currently have 5 of the FCCHs, which again is the 3 to 10, and which is the small star. I guess it's kind of hard to see. And then we have 4 of the CCCs. So we currently have no FCCCs, which is the 10 to 15 in the city of Green River. This is our current zoning. They are permitted in, so the FCCH is for 3 to 10 children in their conditional use permit, and R1, R2, R3, R4, MH, RC, PB, B1, and B, or no, sorry, not in the PB, B1, B2. And then for 11 to 15 children, it's a conditional use permit in the R3 and the R4 zoning districts. Now, the R1 district and the R2 are single-family residential, and the R3 and R4 are more like the single multifamily residential areas, a little bit higher density. If we go to so the conditional use permit, the way we permit those currently is the applicant will fill out their application. They're exempt from the home occupation business permits, but they are required to go through the conditional use permit. And then we require that they shall obtain a business license or the state license required from the Department of Family Services, and then a city business license. This is our conditional use process. Basically, they fill out an application. Notification is provided to the adjacent property owners within 200 feet. And if there's an objection letter received, then it is referred to the Planning and Zoning Commission. If no objection is received in an application, then the application is approved. I do have one coming up that's where they were only requesting the FCCH in residential. I believe it's an R2. It's permitted as a conditional use permit there, but I did receive 2 objection letters, so that will be coming up, and so therefore it'll be referred to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So when the Planning and Zoning Commission reviews it, they're supposed to consider the effects of the proposed conditional use on the health, safety, and general welfare of the surrounding properties. Existing and anticipated traffic conditions included parking facilities on adjacent streets and land, the comprehensive master plan, and the Commission may grant the application by motion imposing such conditions and safeguards as it deems necessary, or the applicant may be denied. This is a little bit of the history of it. I went through, so prior to 2004, before the ordinance was changed, it had a completely different definition, but daycare centers for children or preschools were permitted uses in only an R3 and an R4. There was some workshops performed in think 2002, and then some more in 2004, which they came up to the next step, which is the, you see that? Oh, there it is. Well, I don't know what the light is. But we're under 2004. So in red is what was changed from prior to that. So again, an FCCH, which was the 3 to 10 children, became a conditional use permit in those residential zones. And then they added the Child Care Center and the Family Child Care Center, which is the 10 to 15 children or 16 or more as conditional use permits in an R3 and an R4. They also changed the definitions to match kind of more what the state's definitions were. In 2006, if you look down a little bit, there again in red is what was changed again. They separated the FCCC and the CCC definitions, and they added permitted use for the Child Care Center, the CCC, in the B1 and B2. Then in 2012, it looks like it was more of just an oversight when they changed it in 2006 and added FCCC and the CCC as permitted uses in the PB zoning district. This workshop is to discuss and potentially the consideration of allowing an FCCH, again, which is 10 to 15 children, in a R1 and an R2 zoning district, again, which is low-density residential. I should add that when the ordinances were changed back in 2004, the workshops, there was a lot of concerns and a lot of discussion. You know, they want from residents and from other daycare providers. And I'm sorry, let me think. They wanted somewhere to be left untouched with where they can only have up to the 10 children in those residential zones. So again, there was a lot of discussion on that. The licensing rules and types of child care facilities as defined by the Wyoming Department of Family Services. Again, the FCCH is to provide care for 3 to 10 children in your own home without additional staff. The FCCC, Family Child Care Center, is to provide care for a maximum of 15 children in your home or another building in which you do not reside with 1 additional staff when more than 10 children are present, or the child care facility, the CCC, which is for 16 or more. The child care, I just put down a couple of the basic provisions here. As in Chapter of the Wyoming Department of Family Services, Chapter 1, General Provision. Section 2, the purpose of the rules has been adopted to provide uniform licensing for protection of children in a family child care home, family child care center, and a child care center. In Section 4, the introduction, the department is responsible for the licensing, monitoring, and enforcement of the rules for all Wyoming providers of child care services covered in these rules. Providers, directors are required to comply with all federal, state, and local laws, statutes, and rules that pertain to a child care business in addition to these rules. Allegations of violations of applicable laws, statutes, and rules shall be reviewed by the department and appropriate action taken by the department. As outlined by the Wyoming Department of Family Services, the capacity requirements are a little different here. They look at a certain age of the children. They'll regulate how many children you can have for adults and their age requirements. But the general requirements for Chapter 4, the licensor shall determine total capacity for each facility. The license capacity shall never be exceeded, and the maximum group size shall be limited by facility capacity. And then under their Section 4, Family Child Care Home, the licensor shall determine total capacity for the facility. The license capacity shall never exceed maximum capacity of 10 children. And then the Family Child Care Center, Section Chapter 6, the licensor shall determine total capacity for the facility, and the maximum capacity of 15 children shall never be exceeded. I went on through the I went through other communities in Wyoming and looked at their regulations. I kind of grouped together here similar conditional use, special permit, and administrative review are all kind of similar. They require an additional review, whether it's sending out letters, going to planning and zoning or whatever. And then P for permitted is permitted by right. That just means that they apply for it. It's permitted. And then A for Cody is permitted as an accessory use, meaning that again, it's just permitted as long as it's an accessory use to the primary residential use of the structure. And then X, of course, is prohibited in these. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. Going through and researching all of this, the main things I came up with, or that I found, like neighbors' frequent concerns, are traffic that it'll generate, the home daycare will generate, the parking, noise, lack of supervision, and property values are all very common and frequent concerns of neighbors. But some of the things that we should consider are what our community needs in this area, the safety, the consistency with state licensing, and maintaining the residential character of the home, so you can't tell it apart from other residential zones. The process for this would be a language amendment if they wanted to move forward, and the applicant would complete that along with a fee, and it would have to go through a public hearing in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then have 3 ordinance readings in front of the City Council. So it's a little bit of a lengthy process, but I think discussion is what we're here for today. So.
Okay, thanks, Amy. I think what we ought to do is, unless you want to say anything else, is have some other people, we really have at least 2 people I know of that have brought this up. Presumably they're advocates for it. So we need to hear from them. Then if there's anybody else in the audience that wants to speak about this, they'll have an opportunity, and then we'll potentially have a discussion here and any questions that people might have. Sure.
Planning and zoning, yep.
No.
Okay.
All right. Turn it over to you.
I'm going to give you some more of what she just gave you. But there's also letters from the state, one is from foster care, showing how much that they're turned down for taking from parents, foster parents, because they can't place kids, especially infants.
This is the same thing.
Yeah, that was it.
These gentlemen, I use that term loosely.
And then I also did a petition, which I actually only found online on Sunday, and it already has 100 signatures on it. Some of them, they look through, some of them aren't from River, and that's why I said I got there's more than that. I think it needs to be brought up that the CDC already mentioned that they're closing their daycare. That they, at the beginning of summer, they announced that they're only taking in-house daycare kids. Also, most of the daycares, if you look on page 2, most of our daycares in town do not accept infants. We actually only have 16 infant slots available over here. As a family in home can only take 2 infants. It doesn't matter how many people you have working. If you have 10 kids in your house, you can only have 2 infants. Your slots can go. That's wrong. Your slots can go up in age, but not down in age. Be above that. And then. Sorry. And then there's just there's no infant spots available. And I know that one of the concerns is bringing on one employee, but a lot of these daycares already have one employee because you have a sub for when you need to close. Like, I have a doctor's appointment and I have to bring somebody in to cover the daycare that's licensed in daycare. Parking and everything, these people are in your house for 3-5 minutes. They're dropping off the kids, they're getting to work. At the end of the day, they're grabbing their kids and they're out. There's a letter from Amelia Slater, she's the one that is over foster care, stating that they have a really hard time placing infants because the foster parents cannot find daycare. Penny Kotek, she helps out daycare, helps you do your policies, she's your go-to woman. And she put in there some stats of Green River population is almost 12,000 with 1,861 children from age birth to 5. We actually have 321 full-time slots available in Green River. That does not take into account preschools. Preschools are licensed the same as daycare in Wyoming. So, like the CDC, they have, I want to say, 321 slots available. Only 16 of those at the time were licensed for daycare. So you've got to take about 300 slots out of your daycares, which are, that leaves you 208 slots available in Green River.
Okay. So, is there anybody else that wants to speak? Sure.
So my name is Sarah Allison. Childcare is kind of near and dear to my heart in several different ways. I was a former home provider for about 6 years. I owned a center for 3 years, and the reason I moved into a center was because I outgrew my home. People started having more babies, and you want to keep your families, so we ended up moving our business to Rock Springs. The licensing process is grueling, I can tell you. As a very young person coming in here and having very confrontational neighbors is very intimidating. I was threatened verbally. I was threatened with gun violence the first time I tried to license my home. I am now a mom, an older mom of a 1-year-old, that I drive to North Rock Springs every day for childcare because there's no baby spots in Green River. I am also the director of nursing at Sageview Care Center, and I have lots of employees who call in sick. They're using illegal or unlicensed childcare, and I do have employees from both towns, so I'm kind of speaking for both towns, but that has a great impact on our ability to care for our elderly, obviously. So my little 1-year-old has bounced between family, unlicensed care, and like I said, I have this spot in Rock Springs until the first week of August. So I have a bachelor's degree in early childhood education. Childcare is not just something I did on a whim. It takes a lot of dedication. It takes a lot of time. You have to build a lot of relationships. And we need these daycare spots for working families in Green River. I shouldn't have to drive my 1-year-old to North Rock Springs on that interstate every day to find quality licensed childcare. I am planning on reopening my childcare business next month because I don't believe with the CDC closing that I will find an infant spot for my 1-year-old at that point. So I'm going to leave a director of nursing position to go back to doing childcare so that my child has a safe place to be. Does licensing for 15 impact your neighborhood more than 10? No. I was licensed for 10, and I did foster care on top of that. So there was many times where I had 15 kids in my house for many, many hours a day. And those same neighbors who were very threatening, In the 9 years that I did childcare, not a single person ever filed a formal complaint based on the traffic and the property values and the noise and any of that. Not a single one, because I don't think that those fears are really substantiated when it comes to all of this. Could we move all these children into centers? Sure, but centers are incredibly expensive to run. I was quoted about $1,200 a month for a full-time infant spot in Rock Springs at the senior center. Granted, I make good money, but I'm not married. $1,200 a month would be a huge chunk of my income every month. Right now, I pay $700 a month for 12 days, and that's in a family child care home. So we need these spots so that we can keep the costs down for our families. I could open tomorrow and probably charge $1,200 a month if I wanted for one kid. That's how dire families are getting for childcare, and that's not okay either for young working families. So I am very much a proponent for this, the family child care centers. I am not seeking one personally. I will just license it. But I don't think that impact of 5 other kids is really going to make a difference. That's really all I have to say.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, who wants to ask questions? Anybody here? Well, I've got all kinds of questions. And these are not necessarily of you guys, although you mentioned, so I don't really, it doesn't really matter. But it says here parking requirements, one for 600 feet. Is that theoretically 600 feet that you have to provide for every child? Is that what 1 in 600 means? Sure.
So I believe, was it you that said you had 2,400 square feet currently for your daycare? So do you have 4 off-street parking spaces? Okay. The way I read that is that for the square footage being used for the center, I mean, in most cases it would be for the entire home, but I don't believe they can use the whole entire home. The state limits that. So it would be 1 parking space for every 600 square feet that they use.
Okay, gotcha.
For the home. It has to be, it's supposed to be provided the entire time, yeah, like while they're. No, I mean, that would be ours. Ours were the 1 to 600. It just says you have to provide 1 space per 600 square feet being used, so, or of your home that's being used, so like in your case. For our, yes.
They're all the same.
Yeah, they are, yeah. I believe the state, what zoning would regulate would be, again, because they were exempt from, they took them out of the home occupation and put them just into the conditional use permit. With the home occupation, or with the conditional use permit, I mean, and if it goes in front of planning and zoning, other conditions can be added or applied to their permit. But from a zoning aspect, I think we're looking at parking and the safety. I believe that, I know that the state regulates the yard space that they can use. And I actually think one of you might be able to elaborate more on that as far as all the state requirements for the yard and what else. Because we're looking at parking and zoning and safety. Well,
have, they go up 75 square feet of outdoor play space for each child, when the ages are children.
a minimum of 75 what?
Square per child.
Minimum of 75 square feet per child. Well, I had it on this other, but I don't know if that's something they would like to elaborate on. So I was trying to stay neutral, and I was trying to just find the facts and kind of like what other communities are doing. I mean, I found other communities where the city is not regulating, they've kind of taken a step back, and they're looking at it with HOAs and covenants. Well, all of our zoning districts are already established, so they're not going to address those. Some of the other things were, I gotta think, my mind's going a million miles a minute. So like Sheridan, that's kind of how they had such a huge shortage of childcare. I actually called and spoke with them. And most of the people that have, most of the places where you can have 11 to 15, there's a lot more conditions applied. I've actually in the past dealt with a childcare not here that got highly contentious. The neighbors didn't want it, like it was half and half. So I had a half petition signed for it and a half against it, and it came out equal. Gillette, you know, there's a special use permit, so it goes through a similar process as our conditional use permit. And then one of the questions I kept asking myself is, would I want to live next door to a daycare that had 15 kids coming and going all day? And then I also thought, being a mom, how would I feel if I didn't have somewhere to take my children? So,
Yeah, I want to make some comments here, because I used to regulate zoning in Sweetwater County for 11 years. There's two different issues here. One is there a need, and you guys are presenting that obviously there's a need. So to me, that's fairly cut and dried, pretty simple. Then there's the other issue of zoning exists to separate incompatible uses. And when you're asking for something in a residential zone, a daycare, that's not necessarily compatible with the residential use. So you have a procedure to deal with it, in this case, a conditional use permit. I'm okay with that as far as it gives the neighbors the opportunity to have input into the process, which is critical, because that's what we're talking about. It's residentially zoned. It's a residential zone. And particularly what you guys are talking about is single family, which is a much more protected zone. So again, I think in this whole process and reading through all this, there's a couple of things that make me uncomfortable, and I'm just going to bring them up. It says if there's, again, it's because it's a residential zone. That's the highest and best use of that area. It's protected. And people have a right to expect that when they move in. It's okay to vary from that if you have a process that varies from it. You take into consideration all of the various things that have to be done. Off-street parking is one of the main ones. I think numbers in and of themselves don't mean a lot. I watch when they come to work in the morning, 6:30, whatever, people dropping off their kids on the daycare at hitching post. You know, it never bothers the neighborhood because they come at different times. You know, if everybody came at the same time, it would be a problem. But I think the biggest thing by far, and when it comes back to us in terms of a language amendment, which it's going to, I'm going to certainly talk about the fact that there's two different things in here. One, the fact that if there's no objections, it just automatically happens. I've got a real problem with that because a lot of people don't object till after the fact because they don't know, and quite frankly, I don't want to sound cynical, but I am. So in this particular area, people are apathetic. Half the time they don't even think about it. They're throwing it in the garbage and stuff. That's not excusable, but the reality is again, they have a right in a single-family neighborhood to expect single-family residential. It's completely different from the issue of whether there's a need or not. So I have a little bit of a problem with that, but that's not the biggest one by far. And this is a fairly simple one. I think that there needs to be a review on a periodic basis. Is it typically, or not typically, but quite often, it's annually at first, and then if you don't have any objections and everything's running smoothly, then that period of time gets extended to every 2 years or every 3 years. If you're running a proper facility, you shouldn't object to that, in my opinion.
And if you're being neighborly, I mean, I think neighborly was like a huge thing.
You know, and sometimes you deal with people that this should come as a shock to everybody, that the neighbors, you know, they're objecting, and they're a bigger concern for the neighbor than the people that are working. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything. That's where the Planning and Zoning Commission has an obligation to look into what's going on, you know, kind of a thing. So as long as the process, there's a review process, I would support it, but there definitely needs to be a review process. And then this thing of automatic, I have some problems with that, but I think everybody needs to talk through that in the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we'll see what those folks then recommend to us. But it's not just as simple as there's a need. That's all I'm saying. Because you have a right when you move into a single-family residential neighborhood to believe that there's single-family residences there, and that's it. So if you have a process, it really has to be a process by which you absolutely involve people in it. And you do a good job of running your facility, you stagger people, you do whatever is necessary depending on what comes up. And that's my 10 cents. And I gotta go run and get a proclamation. So go ahead.
Well, I've got just a couple of questions too that have just come up just as I listen to everybody, and that is, in the process, do you send out letters to all the neighbors that are?
Within 200 feet. Mm-hmm.
So you haven't done that yet, though, have you?
Not in her particular case, but is it Allison? Allison submitted an application right before the COVID happened, so she wasn't planning to open for a couple months, so we put it off knowing that we were going to do. Well,
have you received anything back?
I got 2 objection letters for her, so we will be going to, and she's only asking for 10. Go ahead. Well, so like in her case, we did get 2 objection letters, so we'll go in front of the Planning and Zoning. Some of the other things, I guess, that came up that I didn't really put on there was like dead-end streets or cul-de-sacs for traffic as an issue. And also, I mean, we have a lot of shift workers, so, I mean, I know we have a noise ordinance, and I mean, as far as the kids' safety, I think that's all regulated through the state very, very well. I mean, I think with fire, and I had Ken here if anybody had questions for him on the building, and that, but, so they do an annual inspection and then an unannounced annual inspection. It was kind of unclear to me what complaints, if they get sent to, if there are complaints, which ones the state will address. All of them.
You can call and absolutely anything.
And so if the state, if you've got a resident or a neighbor that works shift work and your kids are allowed to play during the hours, they'll address that also? Oh, okay. See, and I wasn't.
Well, I have one more question, and I don't have a problem with this. The only time I would have a problem is if it got a lot of objections of the neighbors. I would think that, as Pete brought up, I would think that would be something that we would have to consider. So the question I have then is, why do this in your home and not in a business district?
Do you want to come up and address what you spoke with on your, on your petition you had outlined, like some rates and stuff?
So I actually did look around just because it had been mentioned doing it in a commercial building. One, I personally don't want to go that big. I have kids of my own at home. I enjoy being at home with them. There is no place available in Green River that meets the state guidelines for a commercial building with a daycare center. The old YWCA was grandfathered in before. I met with the YWCA director in Rock Springs. It would not pass code now. There is a building on Medicine Bow. It's in a prohibited area. They want, I want to say, $360,000 for that building. My daycare parents, some of them can't pay me now. I charge $125 a week, flat rate. They can come from 6:45 a.m. to 5:45 p.m. I don't care how long, anything. $125 a week is a big stretch for a lot of them, especially right now. The overhead, you just can't pay it. That's why the centers keep closing. That's why the CDC is closing their daycare. You can't pay employees enough to cover the cost of how many more kids you take and meet the child staff ratios. I really don't think 5 extra kids in the neighborhood is that big of a deal. These kids are going somewhere else anyway. So, I mean, if you're looking at shift work and somebody dropping off their kid at 10 p.m., that kid's getting dropped off somewhere at 10 p.m. anyway. It's just, daycare's not like a moneymaker like people think it is. And it's expensive.
Yeah, and I just want to make a comment. I'm not saying anything against daycares or the need. What I'm saying is there needs to be a process in which the neighbors have the opportunity, because that's the nature of the residential neighborhood, that's the nature of the laws. That's all I'm saying. And if that happens, and especially if you do, you take things into consideration. You run it properly. You take noise into consideration and things like that. And the people that don't operate it properly, and there can be those, they're not going to be able to continue as long as that process is in place properly. So
I understand that, and because I mean, basically that's what we went through to get the first daycare. We had the CUP. I guess I would ask, what kind of rules would you want to be in? I mean, maybe not taking the kids out before 10 a.m. or something like that to play, so their noise isn't there. I don't.
Again, that's something the Planning and Zoning Commission, that's their job to do, and they'll bring that to us, and then we'll look at the wording and things like that and see, if based on staff's recommendations and, more thorough discussion, whether we think those things need to be put in that they might have omitted. But that's really for the Planning and Zoning Commission and for the community in with the Planning and Zoning Commission to develop those kinds of criteria. Go ahead, Councilman Burke.
Stephanie, as much time as you've spent in this, looking into all this stuff, have you talked to your neighbors one-on-one?
You don't care. My house, you saw my house, I have open all around me. So, my street level, my neighbors are up on the mountain.
So you talked to all of them, and
I haven't talked to them about the going from the 5 more, but I've talked to them in general, asking them if they could, like, and we've all had that child that, that throws a tantrum, that is screaming from the car to the door, and you're like, sorry. And I've never had a complaint. They've never said anything about the noise, never had any problems with parking. I don't know of any daycare that 15 parents show up at once. It's usually this person gets off at 4, this person gets off at 5. I'm picking Johnny up at noon. It's in and out all day long.
okay.
Councilman Murphy, did you want to say something?
I do. I live by a park, and I get kids yelling and screaming all the time. I've got dogs barking in the neighborhood. I've got people with loud cars. Kind of life. And daycare, my wife used to run one before we ever moved here, so I realized that. I do think it's a great thing, and I don't see how, I agree doing the conditional use permits or whatever and checking on it. You already got 10 kids, go the extra 5, bring that in, have the zoning, planning and zoning looking at it, or the state checking you out every year for the first couple times or whatever. Not a problem. I didn't realize the CDC was closing theirs up. And I do know because my son was looking, his girlfriend was looking to get a daycare, and it was like $400 a week in Rock Springs. And he's only a year old. And it's like, it's hard. So I don't have a problem. I do think we need to find out what the neighbors think.
Yeah.
And make sure, because I hate to say this, I had a neighbor before he moved away that it wouldn't have mattered if I wanted to open up a church, he'd have objected to it because we hated each other.
I do want to point out that the state is also in the homes a lot more than once a year. Like if they're in the area, they're popping in. And to give you an example, I did have a complaint. Somebody actually saw on Facebook that my daughter-in-law, who shares the same name as my daughter, had a snake. You can't have snakes in daycares. Shared the post with the state. That day...
Had a snake? Is that what you said?
As a pet. You can't have a pet snake in a daycare. They were on my doorstep that day to search my house for a snake. So, I mean, it's not something the state takes lightly. They're on top of it.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. Yeah, Council, did anybody else?
All I would want to know is I'm in favor of it. The only thing that would cause me to not be in favor of it is if all the neighbors came in and said, we don't want that. That would be my only objection. And so what, I think it was Robert, what he asked is if you've been able to talk to any of the neighbors. Because when you get in front of the planning and zoning, that's a question they will.
Yeah,
they'll
that's
ask.
last time I think we had to write a letter to each of them
Yeah.
within, and I can do that.
Yeah,
Right.
anybody within 200 feet, right?
I
For
think
me,
the
it's
city
not going to be
doesn't.
as part of a problem as a lot of other people, because like I said, I'm street level, my neighbors are
Yeah.
up on the mountain. But still, to talk to them.
Sure.
Well, I think the city has obligation they have to do that.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly what is going to happen. Not every place is going to be appropriate. There's going to be places that are the opposite to yours,
Yeah.
where people are right on top. In fact, never mind. I lived in a neighborhood once where it was one that was right there in the backyard, and it was the kids. It was really noisy, and it wasn't appropriate. But.
Yeah.
But, that's why you have a conditional use permit process, and that's all I'm bringing up. You gotta have that process, and you gotta have that review. That's what they're doing. That's why we're having this, so that language can be adopted, and then we're just gonna have to, might have some discussion on some nuances of the language. Like I say, it would seem to me that when you have, like, for instance, you guys, where you've done it before, after a year, if people are used to it, you don't need to review it every year, you know. I mean, the period can change. That's legitimate.
That's part of the reason I didn't feel the need to go talk to each of my neighbors. Maybe I should have, because I don't think they would know what kids are at my house and what's ours.
Yeah.
For 5 more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're going to have, again, in this process, they have the opportunity to comment.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether you go, they're going to, go ahead, Councilwoman, pardon me.
I heard someone mention that if you have a relative watch your child, that's illegal. Is it illegal?
All of one family, you can watch, so grandma can't watch 10 different kids.
Oh.
Grandma, if you have 10 kids, your mom can watch all 10.
I gotcha.
Because it's from one family.
40 years ago, that's, my mother-in-law watched my children. All in my age now. But anyway, yeah, I wondered about that, and I have a person working for me right now that does have relatives just watching her children.
I think
Or her
as long
child.
as it's one family.
Right, just their granddaughter.
But if you look at,
grandson.
I don't know if you're going to Sweetwater Babysitters on Facebook at all. That whole page is nothing but people offering to say, oh, I have room in my house for 3 kids. And you're like, but you already got 4 and you're not licensed.
Oh, okay.
And that's where everybody's stuck going because there's no, and it's a big deal for our members.
Wow.
Like they come in and inspect us and there's an extra kid there, it's a big deal. It's not a little thing.
Yeah.
Or they just let them out to play without going out with them.
Okay.
Okay, so this is going to move forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission, right? We all, I think, agreed that there's a need, so we're fine with the language amendment that I'm assuming somebody has initiated, or are we going to initiate it in terms of the city?
That was my question, because I have the application here.
It can be done either way. I think we can initiate it, as you guys, the city can initiate a zoning language amendment. It's really the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay.
It doesn't, I don't believe, you can check your, that's pretty typical anyway. It doesn't have to necessarily come from a homeowner. It can come from the city itself.
Okay. Reed, do you have anything on that? Okay. And then I know that once that process starts, I'm not for sure exactly what language needs to say, the extra conditions or the percentage for adjacent property owners or,
Again, I think you've got whoever is interested, needs to kind of show up and begin the process, or you can just get input, quite frankly, from 2 of the people here, and if anybody else wants to, you can just get the word out. They're going to hear from this right here, and you guys start with what you want, and it's going to potentially, just like any law or any, it'll develop as it develops.
I know in the conditional use section, it also, for home occupations, is used if we have objections. So when we're looking to change that, we're going to have to take that, and taxidermy also goes through the conditional use permit process.
Yeah. Well, and really, Amy, the answer to your question is that you plagiarize from some other community that you've already got on the list in terms of what they do, and that's your starting point. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then there's also the standard 1926 Standard Zoning Enabling Act, which, is, so there's a ton of information to start with. I think it's going to be, it's pretty common everywhere, you know. It's going to have stuff that says, you know, you need a parking space, even though you really don't, you know, those kinds of things. And that's where I think the biggest thing by far is notification of adjacent property owners, what they bring up, and then you mitigate it.
So do I sit down with the Planning and Zoning Commission to come up with this?
Yeah,
and then-
Rita will work with you on that.
Okay.
Okay? So it is moving forward, is my point to you folks. Just from hearing this group, that there's no objections to it. So, I mean, if everybody was objecting and said, no, that doesn't make any sense, we shouldn't do it, we wouldn't necessarily recommend that it goes forward. But I'm hearing the complete opposite. There's a need, everybody hears that. Let's see if we can craft something that works. Okay? You guys okay with that? You guys okay with that here? Okay, we're going to move on to the next agenda item, and if you guys want to make a break because you really don't want to listen to this and you've sat in those uncomfortable chairs long enough, thank you guys. Okay. So I am going to read a proclamation right here, and I didn't realize, because it's not... I didn't realize it was on this meeting, so it was in my office, so I had to go pick it up. But I did know that this was going to happen, and it could very easily be, and I'm sure you guys can't believe this, but I could have forgotten and gotten it mixed up. That's what happens when you're 71. Women's Veterans Appreciation Day Proclamation. Whereas women have proudly served their country throughout all periods of the history of the United States to secure and preserve freedom and liberty for all Americans and our allies. Whereas women have formally been a part of the United States Armed Forces since the establishment of the Army Nurse Corps in 1901, but have informally served since the inception of our nation's military. And whereas, whether disguised as male soldiers during the American Revolution and Civil War, as nurses in World Wars I and II, or as combat helicopter pilots in Afghanistan, women have served honorably and with valor. Whereas today women constitute approximately 15% of the military personnel on active duty, and whereas currently women comprise nearly 19% of all active duty personnel in the Air Force, 18% of the Navy, 14% of the Army, and 8% of all the Marines. Whereas the population of women's veterans is expected to reach 2 million by 2020, increasing exponentially from 1.1 million in 1980, comprising more than 10% of the veteran population. Who wrote all these statistics? I'm sorry, go on. Whereas the state of Wyoming can highlight the growing presence of women in the nation's armed forces and the state's National Guard and pay respect to women veterans for their dutiful military service. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Pete Russ, Mayor of Green River, do hereby proclaim June 12th as Women Veterans Appreciation Day in the city of Green River. So I have this proclamation. Did anybody want to speak to this at all? And if you do, hold your speech to 20 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. just go ahead and chat for a moment on whatever it is that you feel.
Thank you very much. I know it's short notice. I just found out Thursday or last Wednesday that it was a resolution that was presented by a few servicewomen last year. So they proclaimed for June 12, 2020 to be the first for recognizing women veterans in the United States. So we're one of the few that are doing it this year. So I just wanted to personally just thank you, and that's about it. Thank you, Council.
All right, good. And I did notice on the list of the Green River, boy, there's a bunch of people I know. So, good. Thank you very much. And here is, yes. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. You bet. Okay. Where do we go? City Administrator. Discussion on fiscal year 2021 budget.
Evening, Council, Mayor. Just don't really have a whole lot to update from the last meeting we had regarding the budget. There were a couple things that we're looking at, some small minor changes that we're able to, that we've adjusted. We've had the complete budget's been sent out to all department heads to check and recheck and let them cry over the programs that we cut. And we also, there's a stormwater project that we're looking at over on utilities side that is going to be dropped next year, which will help that budget line item look good in terms of the enterprise fund. About a $400,000 project that we're going to do. Just to that fund, of course, with the wastewater treatment plant is the way we set up with the pricing in terms of what we're charging our fees, and then how we have the equipment coming in, and how we have the loan set up. It's a cash flow one, and we just want to make sure that we're managing that one through this next year, especially with the situation that we're under. There was a few things from the state, if you saw, having them continue to cut their budgets. Looking at it, we've digested a lot of that Craig report. We've had many conversations internally. Still, if you looked even yesterday, seen with the oil, natural gas, all those prices are better in the last, even going back to the late 2019. So based on the Craig report, when they're looking at negative charges, barrel charges for oil, and what data that they used, I still don't see it at the level. I mean, there's going to be, their revenues are different than our revenues. So we still feel pretty comfortable where we're at. The only other thing we're going to take a look at, and we'll have a discussion either the next council meeting, or I'll send it via emails. We are looking at some possible other measures, such as possible early retirement or something like that. We may take a look at the package deal. Very simple one, similar to what the county had done. And that's only when you look at what we've gone through in COVID by being able to work from home, putting in new measures and electronic measures, and how we're doing our business efficiencies. We know that there probably could be some savings there. Maybe having that get put in place as we go into before we hit the first quarter of the year, provided there's another threat of a second wave of the pandemic or something like that, which hopefully we won't see. Have been out actually went down to Salt Lake over this last weekend and stuff down there. And the types of things, it's as busy as ever. I mean, we went to places we went to, everything was crowded. Traffic, even not so much at the airport yet, but they have been their leisure travel increasing another 15% on the last 2 weeks. So seeing that pick up, which actually is good from our side because it's gas and oil and that kind of thing. So they have a few measures that are out there that are different than ours in terms of opening up. They have spiking cases last week even, but they're still continuing opening. So I think we're looking pretty good on what's doing that. We're continuing to work with Dr. Harris and Dr. Stations from the state and from the county, and move forward with openings on our side. But from a budget perspective, we're, again, no major changes. I can say I've talked to a number of the community service grants people, and they were very excited. Good news to hear that the council has left those alone, and we did not do cuts through them compared to what other agencies have been doing. Granted, we don't pay as much in the community service grant side, but it still has an impact to the budget. But they were they're very happy. They were excited. They wanted to come in right away and talk to the council and say thanks. And I told them we would be able to have that opportunity as we move forward. That's all I have unless you have any questions and concerns on the stuff that you've been looking at.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Reed? We've had quite a few budget workshops. So that's your city administrator's report, or is that the fiscal?
That would be fiscal and no city administrator report, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Don't call me Your Honor. No, I just, okay, well, let's have the council, if anybody, we'll start with Lisa. You have anything, Lisa?
No, just, and I talked to Reed about this. I had a couple of constituents call me about the garbage pickup and, not being picked up, with the wind, having garbage blow all over the place, and they come and pick the garbage up, but they don't get out of the truck and pick up anything that blows. And the one street was under construction. What was that one, Reed? Naughty Pine. I had a gal call me that I know that says, what do we do with the garbage? And Reed was taking care of that today. So.
Yeah, and just as a, for those that are up there, I mean, we do, Andy Hooten, our engineer too, he's up there when it's that pickup day, working with the contractors, helping them bring stuff out and down, helping guide them up through there. This last storm that we had, which was, I was told by Mark it was only a 2-year storm, but I swear it'd be a 10-year storm as much as we had. But, so we had to deal with those issues, and we did get communication, while Wyoming Waste had been doing better, and, I think there's more people getting on. Everyone in our cul-de-sac, for example, knew that it was going to be delayed today, and then it got delayed until Saturday, and then, with how they had, with the sickness in the truck and stuff like that, but then not having it picked up on Saturday, people, they still have to communicate better at that level. She did write back. It had to do with the hours, the DOT hours, but they got everything picked up now, which, by the way, they damaged my can this time on it, so I get to talk to them about it, but and then we did see Michelle was out driving with the new driver yesterday, so they're, trying to train some, and I'm not sure if it was from Rock Springs just to here for temporary, or if it's a full-time new driver, but those are things that we'll find out.
Okay, thank you. Is that it, Lisa? Councilman Murphy.
Only thing I have is we do have the touch truck in Rock Springs for the Rock Springs Rec Center from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. And it's free to the public.
Is that this Saturday,
I
Tom?
know it's in Rock Springs, but the really nice thing is when the Rock Springs Rec Center actually calls and sends a letter to the fire department every year and says, would you please show up because you're the #1 hit for all people, and Rock Springs Fire doesn't do that for their kids.
Yeah, and I used to be one of the ones that did that, because when I was a transportation director, that's a big deal. The kids love it. School bus, they're not such a big deal that they got a school bus that they get on and off. They do that anyway. But they love the fire and playing with the water and stuff. Councilman Kilpack.
As far as Wyoming Waste goes, I have a positive comment that my neighbor had some issues with her garbage can. She called Wyoming Waste, and they were there the very next day and replaced the garbage can. So we just had a good, in our neighborhood, we've had some real good positive experiences, and I do recognize that, and I have seen this throughout the city, where sometimes people will take their yard waste out, and if it doesn't fit in their can, they put it at the side of their can. Well, the contract is not for the Wyoming Waste to get out of the truck and pick that garbage up. All they're supposed to do is pick up the what's in the can. So I've had good experiences. In fact, they called me twice, my house twice, and said they would be delayed. And I don't have any yard waste, because all I have is rocks right now in my yard. So I had a positive experience. I did have one person complain with me. He complained pretty badly, and I told him, I said, well, if I had it to do all over again, we wouldn't have gone with Wyoming Waste. We'd just charge you guys $60 and he never said another word. And that's the truth. Maybe not quite 60, but 58. So,
Councilman Byrd.
I've got two things. I guess I'll go ahead and piggyback on what you guys are talking about as far as Wyoming Waste. If there's anything I've learned in the last 6 months, It's a whole lot easier to get on Facebook and complain than it is look up a number and actually communicate. Because everybody that has ever called Wyoming Waste and asked for a solution, they've given them one. They can't fix all the problems on Facebook, though. And then the other thing is I've had quite a few comments as far as the slurry seal, and had to explain that that's a maintenance, not a rebuild. But there's a huge outcry as far as Bridger and the hole up here on Flame Gorge Way. Not the hole per se, but the dirt square. It's a hole. Yeah, so.
We do have, because they actually redug and put it back in. It's still rough, but we have them coming in.
I'm surprised Lisa hasn't said something yet. Did you?
Mayor, Council, on the issue of the patch on Flaming Gorge Way, we did have another water break there some little time ago. It did deform some of the panels that were there. The immediate repair was to just take out the ones where we needed to for the water repair, but it still had that depression in there, which was a little bit exciting if you were hitting at speed. They've gone and taken out those tilted panels, and they're going to do a larger asphalt repair on that. And with the weather, we're just trying to get fit into the asphalt schedule. It's just a matter of schedule. I was talking to Whiteout about it. Same thing yesterday. The storm didn't help. That much rain doesn't do good on those gravel patches. It's just a matter of getting on the schedule for the asphalt. It's coming.
Okay, that's part 1 of 2.
Okay. Oh, for the slurry seal or Bridger?
Bridger.
Hey, you know what? Bridger is on my list. I've talked in the past about Dirty Dozen. You know what? I'd love to rebuild Bridger. I would love to rebuild Bridger.
Well, we're working on next year's budget, so.
You know, I've spoken with the city administrator about a couple of different things. Bridger is not one that we can do a slurry seal on. That would be a waste.
No, not at all.
And Bridger is not even one that we can do an overlay on. That would also be a waste. Bridger, there are elements of Bridger that have to be rebuilt. There's failures there. As we do rebuild Bridger, there's a good portion of it that needs a new curb gutter and sidewalk. And there's a good portion of it that will benefit from having a storm line under it and getting that water off the surface that contributes to the degradation of the asphalt. So we've been looking at Bridger. We have a concept for Bridger. If we get funding for Bridger, we'll rebuild it. It's definitely one of the priority lists for us. It's definitely one of the Dirty Dozen.
Thanks, Mark.
Just to add to that, I mean, we do have the over collections on the 6 penny. Mark, we, trying to weigh if it's the Bridger or if we do, follow the kind of the pavement condition index process and the consultant work that we had done, and where does it fall within all that. It could either be some overlays and slurries for, because we don't have the 6 penny, and we're on a tight budget as it is, but we do have the ability to, with some over collections, to do that. Bridger might fall within that, but none of the other things will happen in terms of continuing that process until 6 penny's done. So,
the way I look at it is 90% of the citizens throughout the entire city use that street or a side street that adjacent to it, and so as far as bang for your buck type thing, that's what keeps coming back as far as Bridger to me, is that's a priority for everybody that lives in Green River.
Councilman Shattered.
I did get a lot of comments too as far as Wyoming Waste and the compliments in a good way for the mobile app, but then they kind of stepped on their own toes with the fact that after he told everybody that it would be picked up late, then it wasn't picked up for 4 or 5 days and there was no further communication. So I think that's something that they need to work on. That's all I have.
Okay, and I just wanted, I see him in the back there, thank Larry and the fire department for getting the tree trunk off the diversion dam last week. Was it last week? Yeah. And I'd like to thank Amy for her presentation, because I know that as kind of a new in the process, I've been there before, and it's a little nerve-wracking to begin with, but you got it down. So, good job. Anything else? Okay, we're adjourned.